We'll continue, Be'ez Hashem, our introduction to Menachos. And we're now going to talk about another case of a Minchas Yachid, where the individual is bringing his private Mincha. We had discussed, if you remember, the case of Minchas Marcheshes, and then the case of Minchas Machvas. And we discussed the differences between a Minchas Marcheshes and a Minchas Machvas. And now we're up to something called Mafe Tanur Shel Chalos, and that's baked al tachtis hatanur below hefsek kli. So as opposed to the first two categories of a Yachid who's bringing his own voluntary mincha, those two categories of Machvas and Marcheshes both include a kli, some sort of a utensil, that separates the mincha itself from the floor of the oven. Now we're talking about Mafe Tanur, where the mincha is baked directly. The soles and the dough is in direct contact with the floor of the tanur. And now we go on to category number 4. Again, we haven't discussed which of the various menachos you bring or you offer at which particular occasion. We're just trying to describe the different realities of the different menachos. So we have already minchas machvas, minchas marcheshes, minchas mafe tanur. And now we have something called a minchas mafe tanur shel rikikim. And what does that mean? This means that Suras Afiyasa, he kiminchas chalos l'chol dov ve'ena chaluka v'ena elo b'ofen nesinas hashemen bilvad. So, like the case of minchas mafe, it is baked directly on the ground, the floor of the oven. However, in terms of the admixture of shemen, there is where a minchas mafe tanur shel rikikim is different. And we haven't gotten to the point yet where we discussed what shemen and how much shemen is added to the mincha. And then he writes that a minchas mafe tanur shel rikikim has a different surah. It looks differently than a mafe tanur. Shechalos avos v'rikikim dakim. That minchas mafe shel tanur creates a challah oven, very thick, whereas rikikim by definition are very thin. Shtei minchos elu nifsasosos k'mo minchas machvas u'minchas marcheshes. So there's a halacha called petita with regard to mincha. We haven't yet discussed this. Petita means we break down the challah into smaller crumbles, and that applies to all the 4 categories of menachos that we mentioned here. Now, just one second. I'm confused about one point. Sorry. Why is it he counts it as 5? Second, why 5? Minchas machvas marcheshes mafe tanur. Not sure. Why does he count it as 5? I only count 4. All right, I'm just missing something. Do you catch it? Why is it counted as 5? I only count 4. We have minchas Machvas, we have Minchas Marcheshes, we have Mafitana Shel Chalos, Mafitana Shel Rikikir, Minchas Solos. Okay, somehow he dropped it in the original list. You see that? Hamesh Mehen, Boaz Beneder Dava. He also mentioned Minchas Solos. Okay, so the fifth category, as Steve points out very well, is Minchas Soles, which we said that the Soles is put into a Kli together with Shemen Ulevodim. It doesn't have any afia at all. And it's not even fried in a pan. It's just an add mixture of oil and a certain spice and solas. And we burn it on the mizbeach. Okay. Now, we said before, this was, I think, something that we touched on yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, that the volume of the mincha is called an isarim. And again, when we get to the opportunity, we'll try to study exactly in our measurements what is an isarim. Now, with regard to 4 out of the 5 categories, all of which are baked in an oven, then the kmitza, which is the central avoda of a mincha, takes place after the afil. Rabbi Yehuda says that ofen mimena eser chalos. Okay, I'm not sure exactly how you get eser chalos. Okay, fine. L'das Rabbi Meir 12 chalos. V'di'eved gam in piches o riba mishir zek sheros. So again, after kmitza, what you're left with is eser chalos. The kmitza takes place after the afiyah. Again, we're missing Yedias here, so we're going to have to be patient here. You know, we're entering into a whole new world. How do you do kmitza after afiyah? He doesn't tell you how that works. Now, how many chalos did you bake? The answer is that's machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says the magic number is 10 chalos. Rabbi Meir says 12 chalos, but that's not critical. Okay, fine. Now that refers to the 4 categories of a minchas yochid when he comes forward with a contribution, a neder or a dava. And what about the 5th category, which we said was minchas soles? That's not baked at all. Nefeku rishonim b'minchas soles shenefes li'achar kmitzos. So we always said that in all 4 minachos, the afiyah takes place first, and then subsequently the kmitza. But in the case of minchas soles, the kmitza takes place first, and then the afiyah. So what I told you before, that in the case of minchas soles, there is no afiyah, that's not really true. There is afiyah, but after kmitza. Now, yesh sovrim she'ena tzricha liyofas eser chalos, yesh sovrim shafid nefes eser. So we're not sure if after kmitza you need to bake l'chatchila at least eser chalos in the case of a minchas soles. Ha'omer, a person vows, harei alai minchas machas, vehevi marcheshes. or the reverse. Harelai marcheshes vehevi machas. Now, we're not sure why he would choose this or that. That still remains an unknown. What motivates him this way or that way? But whatever it is, the case, the scenario was that they switched it and they brought the wrong mincha. Do we view this as all one mincha, so to speak? They all belong to one category, whether it's a marcheshes or a machvas. And it says, minchaso kreva b'toras minchas nidava, which means that now he's going to have to replace this mincha with another mincha, meaning he's going to have to fulfill his original obligation. He cannot fulfill it with the wrong mincha. But this mincha that was brought erroneously, mistakenly, now is a mincha, it's a valid mincha, as a nedava, it's an extra nedava. So in addition to his original nedava, which he's now going to have to fulfill, he has another nedava. He gets two checks up in Shemayim. Lo yotzi yedei nidro ashi yomi kefisha nada. The Amar al soles harei zula machvas ve'evia marcheshes. Now we're talking not about a neder, but rather about a nedava. Nedava means not harei alai, but harei zu, and he points to soles. He says harei zu lemarcheshes or harei zu lemachas, and they brought the wrong one. So I would say that in that case, he does not have to replace this mincha with another mincha to fulfill his nedava, because the nedava was on this particular solas. And if this solas is not a fulfillment of, the kiyum of the avoda was not in line with his original nedava, because his nedava was on a machvas, and they mistakenly brought it as marcheches, he would be exempt from replacing it with another minchas machvas. But what's the status of this mincha that was mistakenly brought as the opposite, as marcheches instead of machvas, for example? Because until now we said that in the case of a neder, where he says harei alai, then b'di'evet he can make the swap, and he's yotzei. And not that he's yotzei, but I need to say that the carbon is kosher, the mincha is kshera. It's ol l'shem nidava, and he gets 2 brownie points. But here in the case of nidava, a mincha psula. Why? Why is it different than a neder? She came li'achar. By the way, is Ben here? I thought I saw Ben. Okay. She came li'achar shes kadsha b'kli shores l'shem mincha achas shuv I efshal l'shanosa l'mincha cheres. In other words, in the first case of a neder, when they place the soles into the kli, whether it's a machvas or a marcheshes, they knew exactly what the carbon was going to be, what to make sure the mincha was. So the kiddush kli was on a minchas machas or minchas marcheshes. Again, it doesn't mean he fulfilled his neder, because he said harei alai vis-a-vis the other one. We'll have to replace it, but it's a carbon kosher. Masha Einkin, in the case of harei zu, the hegdesh, the akdasha, took place immediately, and that was akdasha l'shem machas. So when he puts this into a kli and he makes it into a marcheshes instead of a machas, he has already brought a carbon that didn't have akdasha to it, right? You bring a machas and it never had a kiddush kli of a machas, because he said harei zu marcheshes. So the kiddush kli was a kiddush of marcheshes. And if the carbon was brought as a machmas, well, it didn't have kiddush. Any carbon that comes without kiddush is meaningless. So not only is he still compelled to fulfill his nidava, which he hasn't for so that we wanted to say that in the case of nidava, he doesn't have to bring another curve. And I'm hoping he's going to say that. Omer harei alai mincha shel shnei esronim lahavi b'kli echad. So if you recall, we discussed yesterday that you could max out a large volume in one kli up to 60 esronim. And here he wanted to have both esronim in one kli. He could have gone up to 60. But hevi b'shnei kelim. Now, does the fact that the mincha was brought in two kelim create a hefsek in which each mincha has only one isara? He took upon himself as a neder to bring a mincha of two isronim. He did bring two isronim, but he brought it in two kelim. Is each kli a separate mincha? Hareim sheros b'toras nidava. Again, he brought two menachos, but they're two separate menachos. It's an nidava, it's an additional brownie point, but he has not fulfilled his obligation because he took a neder to bring one mincha of two esronim. And instead he brought two minchos, each one of one isaron. He never brought one mincha of two esronos. So he still has to replace his original nidava, his original neder. But once again, as far as the menachos that were brought, they're valid. Each one has an isara in two separate kelim, two separate menachos, and he gets brownie points. Achlo yotzi yedei nidro. Okay, now let's ask the following question again without peeking. Let's just see intuitively if we can guess what's coming around the bend. What happens in a case of an adult? So he points to the soles and he says, this is a mincha of two esron. And at the end of the day, they bring the mincha in two different kelim and he saw it in each one. Would it be Kodshim? And again, we would apply the logic that we applied earlier in the case of Machmas and Marcheshes, that there was no Kiddush Kli, because he was Makadish two esronim, and they brought only one Isaron in the Kli. It's a whole different entity of a mincha. Let's see if we're right. The Omar al Shnei Esronim Soles. Hare elu lemincha b'kli echad ve'viyah b'shnei kelim mincha psula. And let's see if he adds anything in the footnote. All right, this footnote is he's expanding it to another case of Arei Lai Shnei Esronim La'avi b'kli echad ve'viyah b'shnei kelim. Amru lo alo b'kli echad nadarta lo shama devreya v'kriva b'shnei kelim. All right, that's it. Again, what I think is going on is that a mincha of one isaron in one keli is not integrated into another mincha of an isaron in another keli. And if he was magdish two esrodim in one keli, then what he's left with when they bring each isaron in a different keli, it's a totally different mincha than the one he was magdish. So this mincha is psula because it doesn't have akdosh. And it's not like the case of a neder, where in the case of a neder of two isronim in one kli, and they brought two isronim in two kelim, each one with an isaron, there the carbon is kosher because the original akdosha in the kli was one isaron in each kli. Again, he hasn't fulfilled his obligation because they never brought his mincha. His neder was to bring one mincha of two esronim. By the way, what becomes clear here as this picture gets more flesh and blood is that the volume of the mincha is very critical. You and I would have said, what's the big deal? Okay, so you brought one Isar here and one Isar here, each one in two. No, no, no. The mincha is defined as such by the volume of the solas. Rav Shimon Sober, shekvius hakli, eno klum, the efshal l'shanos. We've gotten so used to the Tanakama, it's very hard for us to get, to reorient ourselves with Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon is holding that this kli is not the be all and the end all. It doesn't create how do we say it in English, engraved in stone. It's not engraved in stone. And you can change it. And therefore, even in the case where he says Harei Zu, the mincha is kshera, the yotzidei chovasa. So that's Reb Shimon. Again, this sheet of Reb Shimon requires a great deal of analysis. We don't have the ability to do so, but basically he's assuming that whatever you put in the kli is not kover, he says. He calls it Eina Kvius Kli. It's Eina Klum. Kvius Kli is Eina Klum. So if that be the case, the fact that he brought one Isaron in each Kli, that doesn't separate the two Isronim, because the Kvius Kli is not again, he says Yachal Chanotz. We have to understand that according to Rav Shimon, he has to change it. And he's got to add an Isaron to the Kli, otherwise it'll be possible. But he can salvage it even though it was a separate akdasha of an Isaron in each one of the two kelim. Now, if you recall yesterday, we discussed that all menachas come from one of two grains, either from chitim or siorim. And we pointed out that the general rule, maybe on the second day of Pesach, we have the Omer is a little bit of a different case, and we have minchas sota of barley, but generally speaking, every mincha is made of chita. And that's what he points out over here. Minchas neder nedava, eno ba ela misoles chita. But now, what happens if he wants to volunteer and change the rules of the game? He wants to bring a voluntary mincha of siorim. The only mincha of siorim that we know is the Omer, which is an obligatory carbon tzibur, and we have a mincha sota, which is an obligatory minchas yachid. But we don't know of a minchas yachid that comes from siorim as a dava. There just is no such thing. You could have a minchas chova, either a chovas tzibur on second day Pesach, or a minchas chova miyachid in the case of a sota. Those could come from barley, but there's no such thing as a minchas yachid of a nedava that comes from barley. He wants to change the rules of the game. Is on this we have machlokas tanon. The chachamim say that he took an adava neder to bring a korban mincha. He's got to replace it. What we got from him was siorim. Siorim is not valid as a minchas yachid. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Why? He says lochal midra. When he said harei zu or harei alai mincha min hasiorim, it's meaningless. There ain't no such thing. Is therefore lochal midra vareu potami klum. Doesn't have to bring anything. He took upon himself a pledge that is blown up, so to speak, minela. It's torpedoed inherently because there's no such thing in your situation, my friend, of a minchas siorim. It's got to be a minchas chita. Now, what does the Tanakama hold? If Shimon says lochal nidra, Tanakama holds he's chayav because he said a real lie. And the Chacham say once he says a real lie, he's got to be makriv and a dove. He's not going to bring it from siorin. He's going to bring it from chitin. So it seems, I mean, just on a very technical level, that when a person says Hareya Olai Minchas Siorim, then the Tanakama is going to cut him off midway. What we hear is Hareya Olai Minchas. If Shimon says, no, take the whole sentence as one entity. Minchas Siorim. Minchas Siorim is a non-entity. It doesn't exist. He has not legally committed himself to bring a mincha at all. He's off the hook completely. Tanakama says he took upon himself to bring a mincha. He made a mistake and he thought he could bring a mincha of siorin, get away cheap, siorin are cheap. Well, I don't know, I pay for Cheerios that are made of barley, I pay a full price. But anyway, barley is supposedly cheaper than wheat. And according to Shimon, this is a non-entity. And Chachamim say no. He took upon himself to be makriv a korban. The fact that he added siorin, that's meaningless. We don't relate. This reminds us of a sugya we learned in Psachim once about whether we say Tfos Lachon Rishon or Tfos Lachon Achra. If we say Tfos Lachon Rishon, he committed himself to bring a mincha, and he'll have to live up to that. That's the Tanakam. Say Tfos Lachon Achra. Well, he committed himself to bring a mincha min hasiorim. Such a thing doesn't exist. Okay, then, and now we have a pencil, thanks to Steve, so we can make a note of where we got up to. And we'll stop here. Now, Rabbosai, it would be great if you could get a hold of the Mesifta on Menachos.